On today's episode of the Football Fellowship podcast, I'm going to be naming who I think is the best performing player and the worst performing player from every Premier League club so far this season. I can imagine there's a lot of players you'll have in mind who I think are definite shouts for this list, but I also think I've thrown in a few surprises here, a few curveballs, some names that people may not agree with. But you know what? I reckon I've got the stats to back it up and change your mind if that's the case. So keep in mind some players you think will definitely be on this list, and we'll see how they compare to mine throughout the episode. And welcome back to the Football Fellowship podcast. Thanks for joining us. I say us, it's just me today. My name is Toby, and unfortunately my co-host Mevin couldn't join us this week, so you're stuck with just me. It's been a week now without club football, and during the international break, I can't say I've watched much football. Really, I know someone who hosts a football podcast, that's quite strange to hear, but I think outside of the Euros and the World Cup, like quite a lot of fans, it just doesn't interest me too much. I'm a massive Arsenal fan, and I love watching club football. I love watching the Prem, the Champions League, other European leagues, but for international friendlies and qualifiers, the passion and the excitement just isn't quite there for me. So I can't say I've caught too much of it so far, but bring on the Euros next year and I'll be watching every minute, I'm sure. So yeah, today's episode we are just going to be looking at who I think are the best and worst performing players from every club so far this season. I've tried to break it down into three categories actually, because there was sort of like a middle best sort of player that I wanted to do, so I'll just explain it. For each club, I think I've chosen the best performing player so far this season in the Prem. I've also got a category for someone who I think is a bit of an unsung hero, someone who has performed really well and maybe isn't the most obvious shout, and somebody who I don't think I've heard much praise for, sort of in mainstream media, on TV and radio, and also on social media. Just names that have performed really well, have some really good stats, and just aren't getting the praise that maybe they should. And then instead of going for the absolute worst player, I feel like that could be quite easy for a few teams. It could be somebody who's not in the squad much, someone who's just filling in an injury. I've actually gone for the most disappointing player so far this season, somebody who maybe we expected more from in pre-season, somebody who just hasn't reached the hype, or maybe somebody who's sort of continuing poor form, even if they have had a good spell previously. So instead of just the absolute worst player, just the most disappointing, mixed up a little bit, and thrown a few interesting names. But let's just jump straight into it, and we'll work our way down the table. So to start us off, top of the league, unfortunately, as an Arsenal fan, I have to say it's Tottenham Hotspur. They have played brilliantly so far this season. Postecoglou's system has clicked a lot sooner than I think most people would have thought, and he's got every player in that squad playing fantastically, playing probably some of the best football they've played for the last 4 or 5 years. Here's some new additions to the team. They've all melded in really well, and they are playing some really great attacking football. So this was actually quite a tough team to start off with, because I feel like there's so many good performing players. I think we could have had Son in there. We could have had someone like Udogie, but I feel like the obvious pick for this one, and the person that I have gone for, is the August Premier League Player of the Month, James Maddison. He has fit into this team fantastically. He already looks like a leader in the team. He looks like their sort of go-to man at the moment, and he has just performed fantastically. He's got 2 goals and 5 assists in 8 games already this season, and he's really occupying that sort of left half space number 10 role fantastically. It's maybe meant that the sort of left winger in the side, whether that's Solomon, Brennan Johnson, or Richarlison that we've seen this season, maybe can't shine as much, but I think the way Maddison's playing, you have to let him do what he needs to do to play as well as he is. And some of his stats are just absolutely fantastic. He's in the 99th percentile, so the top 1% in Europe over the last season against other attacking midfielders and wingers. He's in the top 1% for assists, the top 3% for expected assists, the top 10% for non-penalty expected goals plus expected assists, and the top 1% for shot-creating actions. I feel like for a number 10, you cannot really ask for much more than he's done so far this season, and so far he seems like a bargain, despite the quite hefty price tag that it may have seemed they paid towards a relegated club. He has been absolutely fantastic, and if you can keep this up, Spurs will be staying around that top 2, top 3 of the table for the coming weeks for sure. The unsung hero in the Tottenham side is also been quite difficult to pick, so I think a lot of players have been getting a lot of praise, and rightly so. I think players like Sarr, Basuma, Udogie have all been brilliant this season. Maybe less praised than other players in the squad, but I think they still have been praised, and I think they have all performed really well. Someone I haven't heard much of this season, though, and someone I think has actually gone really under the radar as a great creative threat in the league, has been Dejan Kulusevski, and he is my unsung hero for Tottenham. He has only not played 9 minutes. He has played almost every single minute so far in the league this season, and he is a pivotal part in that Spurs attack, and that Spurs attack is what has been the best unit so far in the league this season. He's in the top 10% for attacking penalty touches. He has 2.3 expected assists so far this season, which is the same as Neto, which is fantastic. And I think he's linked up really well with Pedro Porro in the right back. I think they've got a really attacking, dangerous right-hand side where both players can come in and go out as they please. Pedro Porro loves to invert and loves an overlap, and Kulusevski's the same. He does like to come in on that left foot and try and curl crosses or curl shots in, but he's also so gifted on both feet that he can go either way, and that interchange has been really nice to see so far this season. And I think if Spurs weren't playing as well, maybe didn't have as many other players getting a lot of praise, then I think we'd be hearing a lot more about Kulusevski like we did last year. But I just think he's still performing at that level, maybe just without the plaudits. And again, I've said this for all three categories actually. Spurs are difficult players to pick down to one person for this list. And for this, it was actually difficult to get one player, which was their most disappointing player so far this season, because they have all performed so brilliantly. And unfortunately, it is someone who gets a lot of jokes and memes and stuff at social media thrown at them, but it would have to be Richarlison. Unfortunately, he has looked like the sort of slowest player in that attacking unit, the one who's linking up maybe not as well as the other players. I wouldn't go so far as to say he sticks out like a sore thumb, but when he has played, whether up front on the left wing, there's just something missing about his game. He does have 1 goal and 2 assists to his name so far, which isn't a bad return for 8 games, especially someone who has been moved around positions a lot and has been dropped for some games as well so far this season. But I feel like when you're a player who is playing for Brazil, played in the World Cup, scored World Cup goals, someone who came in for a big price tag, someone who we expected so far this season to be their starting striker, now to be pushed out to the left wing with Son playing as a false 9, and his position on that left wing isn't even secured, with the likes of Solomon having a fantastic season, Brennan Johnson coming in at the end of the transfer window. I feel like he is slowly moving down that pecking order. And for me so far, even if there wasn't much hype around him before the start of the season, a player of that name and price, I think he has to be Spurs' most disappointing player this season. So moving on to the next team. Same amount of points, just second on goals scored, which... it ilks me. I wish we could be top, but it is Arsenal in second place. Again, having a really good season so far. Maybe a few things potentially missing, a few sort of chance creation problems so far with Arsenal this season, but they've looked really defensively solid. They've definitely looked like they've matured from last year, and despite some injuries and setbacks, they're sitting in second place and are playing really well, and had a fantastic win last week against Man City. So for their best player so far this season, I was very close to putting Declan Rice, who I think has been absolutely incredible. I think he is one of the best, being the best midfielders so far in the league this season. He's played as a 6, he's played as an 8, he can drop into left centre-back, and in each of those positions he has excelled and has really carried Arsenal forward as a leader already. I'm just so happy that we broke the bank and went and got him, because he has fit in so well and been brilliant for us so far this season. But unfortunately, he has been pipped to Arsenal's best player so far by William Saliba for me. He is a wonderful player, an amazing defender, and he probably is one of the main reasons why Arsenal sit on top of the clean sheet chart with 4. He's only 22, which is just crazy. He looks like he's been playing for a decade. He has... top 10% for passes attempted around Europe in the last year. He's getting 4 progressive passes per 90, and he is the stonewall of the Arsenal defence. He is just been so good, so secure. He's one of those defenders. I don't want to throw comparisons to Van Dijk, but I think his defending style was very similar. He's someone who has a really great perception of space and is not someone who will be diving into challenges, but someone who can anticipate where the ball is going really well, step in when needed, but can also step off, know when there's no danger, see it out. And I think players are starting to have that against Saliba like they did with Van Dijk a couple of seasons ago. Not to the same ilk, because Van Dijk is still very far ahead of Saliba in his development, and at the time was the best defender in the world. I don't think Saliba's there just yet, but I think it is getting to the point where players are breaking potentially against Arsenal, seeing sort of Saliba and the way that he manages his space, the way he can pressure the opponent, and they're really struggling to get past him. He hasn't been dribbled past so far this season, and he makes less than one tackle per 90, which seems really low, but I think again it's that perception of space. It's the way he's dealing with the opposition possession where he doesn't need to tackle them, and he can prevent that danger without having to step in a lot of the time. And he just keeps getting better and better, and I can't believe he's only 22. He's only going to get better, which is amazing. So very grateful to have him, and so far he's been the best player for Arsenal this season, I think. For the unsung hero, there was another player who I almost put in, which was Ben White. I think he has been a really great player for us for the last couple seasons. He's been our starting right back without a doubt, and I think he's really progressed his sort of attacking game in the last couple seasons. He's always been a great defender, a really good 1v1 defender, and someone who can step into either right centre-back when Zinchenko inverts to create a back three, or someone who loves an overlap, linking up with Saka and really getting involved with the attacking play. But unfortunately, I've actually gone for, as my unsung hero for Arsenal, is Gabriel Jesus. A lot of this is mainly to do with sort of the talk at the moment about Arsenal needing a number 9. A lot of shouts of us, people saying we need to sign Osimhen, we need to sign Tony, we need a goal-scoring number 9. And don't get me wrong, I think we do need some more backup up front. I don't think Nketiah is maybe the quality that we need for when Jesus needs a rest, or is injured, or is suspended, to step in. I don't think Nketiah is quite there, and I think a backup for Jesus would be good. But I think the way sort of the talk is going about Arsenal needing a number 9, I think a lot of people are forgetting what Jesus brings to Arsenal. And for me, how pivotal he is to Arsenal's attacking play. He's probably my favourite player to watch for Arsenal at the moment. I can just keep an eye on him the whole game, and he drops so deep sometimes. He goes onto the last man sometimes, pushes out wide, carries the ball, progressively passes the ball. He brings so much to his game. He's in the top 1% against forwards across Europe for almost all defensive stats, tackles, interceptions, blocks. He's one of the best pressers in the league. He is in the top 20% for almost all passing and dribbling stats, progressive passes, progressive carries, successful take-ons, things of those ilk. His goal scoring is still decent. He produces 0.4 goals per 90, so almost a goal every 2 games, which over a whole season would equate to almost sort of that 17, 18, almost 20 goal mark. And he's in the top 10% for non-penalty XG and expected assists. For me, the way he drops in, the way he links is pivotal, and I think hopefully if he keeps playing and people start to realise how good and how important he is to Arsenal, he will be falling under that same bracket as Roberto Firmino. Someone who doesn't need goals to be an important player playing up front. Somebody who lets your Salah and Mane's get the goals and the assists, looking at Saka and Martinelli to produce those. He is fantastic, and I really hope he is our starting striker for the rest of the season. I don't think we need to go and spend 100 million on a striker. I think we just need a backup and a backup to Jesus. So that's why he's my unsung hero for Arsenal. And as much as I don't want to pick a disappointing player for Arsenal, it being my club, unfortunately, it would have to be Kai Havertz this season. Don't get me wrong, I think he has performed well, and I think he is starting to settle in well. I think we saw in that cameo against Man City what he brings to Arsenal. He brings the press, he brings defensive solidity, despite playing as a striker for many years. He brings hold-up play, he brings height, he brings really good movement. But unfortunately, it just hasn't clicked so far this season. Spent 65 million on Kai Havertz. A lot of people saying he shouldn't be a starter. I'm neither here nor there at the moment. I think it depends on the game. But hopefully over time that left centre mid position will start to become his, but he has looked sluggish. He's looked okay off the ball, but on the ball, he looks like he's lacking confidence. He looks like it's just not there. The tempo's just not right yet. He's playing a lot of safe passes. He's not really progressively carrying or passing the ball. It's a lot of sideways passes. And I just think for the price tag and maybe the name and to be honest, maybe what I was expecting him to slip into that left centre mid role, and it'd be perfect for him given his sort of play style and his best attributes. But unfortunately, it's just not there yet. And for me, he does, unfortunately, have to be Arsenal's most disappointing player so far this season. Up next, for the best player for Man City, I think I can hear everyone shouting that it is going to be Haaland. And of course it is. He is the best striker in Europe. He is one of the best players in the Premier League, without a doubt. An absolute phenomenon. It's mental. It seems this season he hasn't played as well as last season, and he has 8 goals and an assist in 8 games. It just shows how amazing he was last year and how well he is doing this year. And that's the thing, it's like the Salah curse. He's going to have to keep scoring and keep bagging loads of goals for people to think that he's having a good season, which is just shows how good he is. He has a 7.9 XG and 8 goals, so he is finishing chances as you would expect. But to even produce 7.9 XG from your movements as a striker is just phenomenal. It was very close, actually, in this pick between him and Rodri. I think Rodri, we've seen how much Man City not rely on Rodri, but how much he brings to them. He is probably one of the best midfielders in the world, if not the best midfielder in the world at the moment. He dictates their tempo. He knows when to play it safe. He knows when to move it forward. He gets things ticking. He is that metronome in that Man City side. And we've seen in the last 3 games that he hasn't played. The Newcastle in the Cup, Wolves in the league and Arsenal in the league. They've lost every game that he hasn't played. And it's actually why he missed those games, is why he's not their best player so far this season, was because of that red card that he got. It was just a bit of a head loss, and the way it's impacted Man City's season up to now, that one mistake, I know it's a mistake, but the impact it's had was too big for me to put him as the best player, so Haaland gets that accolade. But 2 fantastic players, and 2 players who will certainly be the most important players getting Man City that title, if that's their aim this season, which I'm sure it is again. The unsung hero for Man City, for me, again, there's a few players we could throw in here. Man City have such an incredibly talented squad, and it's difficult to give out praise to all of their players. Alvarez and Walker are 2 players who I think have been fantastic this season, but have been praised quite highly. So for me, the unsung hero is actually Akanji. The Swiss centre-back, he's had 6 starts so far this season, and I feel like his transition into the Man City team has been almost seamless. When they first signed him for quite a low fee, I think it was sort of around that 20 million euro mark, correct me if I'm wrong. It seemed like just a squad player signing. He didn't particularly light up the world in Dortmund when he was there. But when he's come into Man City, he has been fantastic. He is so strong, such a good 1v1 defender, whether he's playing pushing up into the defensive midfield, whether he's playing as a fullback or sitting just as a natural centre-back. He has been really good for Man City, and he has done it again so far this season. He's in the top 4% for progressive passes completed amongst old players in Europe so far this season. So a really fantastic player, and someone who I think has transitioned into that Man City team so quickly that people have forgot to praise him, really. The most disappointing player so far this season for me from Man City, unfortunately, would have to be Mateo Kovacic. I don't think by any stretch he's had a bad season. It's his first season playing for Man City in a Guardiola system. We all know how difficult that can be to transition to, how much is expected from you from Pep Guardiola, and how much you have to adapt your personal play style to the team style. That's what Man City are all about. It's about that system. And I don't think he's transitioned poorly. I just think he's not up to speed yet. He is a fantastic player, and I think was a great coup from Chelsea for Man City to get him. He's an exceptional ball retainer, but I just think there's a few elements of his game that are maybe missing compared to the other midfielders that Man City have had or do have. I don't think he has that same burst into the box sort of run that we saw from Gundogan. And I think that's something that Man City are maybe missing a bit this year. Rodri seems to have stepped into that. But obviously when he does that, that does leave a gap. Kovacic is the one to fill that gap whilst Rodri is pushing potentially further forward. He doesn't quite have the creativity of Kevin De Bruyne or the range of passing. And I think he's quite similar in play style for when Bernardo Silva plays in midfield. But obviously, I think Bernardo Silva is a better player. I think he's someone who is a better carrier and a better passer of the ball. So I just think there's a slight downgrade between Man City's other options and how Kovacic is playing so far. So for me, unfortunately, he would have to be the most disappointing player from Man City so far this season. Moving on to fourth place to round up the top four in the Premier League is Liverpool. And the best player so far from Liverpool for me this season is Mohamed Salah. He, for me, has been the best Liverpool player by a long stretch again, and it still seems like he's not getting much shout. He has been the best player probably in the Prem for the last decade, looking in terms of longevity and accolades and how many goals and assists he scored. He is still incredibly underrated despite all of this. He is second in the league currently for non-penalty expected goals and expected assists. He has really run the show for Liverpool, and I think he's done it in quite a lot of different ways throughout the years. Sometimes he's coming in. I think last season we saw him further out wide, and this season he seems to have almost a bit of a mixture of both, depending on the way that Liverpool is set up. They've had a lot of changes this season, but he has really carried them. He's become a really elite creator this season. He has created most of Liverpool's dangerous chances, and if he can keep this up, 5 goals and 4 assists after only 8 games, you're looking at 20 goals and 15 assists by the end of the season, which are incredible numbers, and he has really helped Liverpool break into that top 4 this season. The unsung hero from Liverpool for me would be Dominic Szoboszlai. He has been really exciting to watch. He's someone I've heard a lot of things about over the last couple of years, playing at Salzburg and then on to Leipzig, and it's crazy that he's only 22. I feel like it's a name we've heard for years about his quality, about his physical attributes. He seems like a really complete player already. He's over 6 foot tall, and he's a great presser, a great defender. He's really creative, a really great range of passing, and he's one of those players, when they strike the ball, it is always such a pure, clean shot. Just a really satisfying player to watch. And someone who I think has fit into that right 8 role for Liverpool almost seamlessly. He's made it his own, and I think he has been so good this season that it has restricted Trent potentially creatively quite a bit. He occupies a lot of the same spaces that I know Trent can sometimes like to drift into, but I think the way Szoboszlai is playing, that Liverpool are having to let him do that and have Trent back off for now. Yeah, he is a fantastic elite player, and for me, if he keeps progressing as he is, he will be maybe not as good in terms of quality, but a very similar build to someone like KDB that we see now, Kevin De Bruyne, someone who is a really elite creator, but also has so many more aspects to his game in terms of physicality and defensive work rate. So yeah, Szoboszlai, unsung. Give him some more praise, guys. He's been fantastic. The most disappointing player so far for me this season has actually been Ibrahim Konate, the French defender. It's been a funny one with him over the last season or so. It seems like he was really brought in to sit alongside Van Dijk as the starting centre-back going forward and to be someone who replaces Matip. But Matip has started 6 out of 8 games so far this season, with Konate actually only starting 2. And I know he's had a few injuries over the years, and he has had a little knock this season where he did miss 2 games. But I'm just still waiting for him to step up and be that centre-back partnership with Van Dijk, because I think he is a fantastic player, and I think he just needs a good run of games. I'd really like to see that, because I think he is a great player, and I think the injuries and rotation, Matip coming in, and the sort of change in system that we've seen sometimes, with Gomez playing right back, even Konate I think has played right back so far this season sometimes, hasn't been particularly good for him, and I think going forward, if we see him sitting alongside Van Dijk and keep developing, he can become a really great defender, but he just hasn't hit that for me yet. On to 5th place, the potentially new Champions League spot, actually, which could throw in a really, really interesting curveball team into the Champions League from England next year, is Aston Villa. They've had a fantastic season under Emery, continuing on their good form from last season, and I think when we saw them lose 5-1 to Newcastle at the start of the season, I feel like a lot of the talk has been maybe surrounding how they're not going to do as well, but I think they've pushed that result to the side and have absolutely cracked on and been really, really good so far this season. Again, they're carrying it on. And for me, their best player, and one of the reasons why I think they have performed so well, is Diaby. He has been probably one of the signings of this season. He is absolutely fantastic. He can do almost everything in an attacking sense for me. He can carry the ball, he can pass the ball, and he can score. He is brilliant. He has 0.6 non-penalty expected goals and expected assists per 90, which is a really, really elite number that you're looking for. Someone who plays, he plays as a 10, I suppose, but he almost has a free role with Aston Villa. He sometimes sits up alongside Ollie Watkins, he sometimes drops deep to pick up the ball, and he sometimes also pushes out to that right wing, or even that left wing if McGinn starts to invert, who is normally their starting left mid this season. He's almost like a wild card. You can see defenders aren't sure what he's going to do, and that he really brings a fear when he has the ball. He's had 3 shots per 90 this season. He's had a really good shot volume, really good output, and it has been a brilliant signing for Aston Villa and someone who's fit in so seamlessly. The unsung hero for Aston Villa so far for me this season is potentially a bit of a surprising one. It's someone who has come in and replaced the injured Alex Moreno, and that is Luca Digne, someone we haven't heard of much in the last couple of years. He started his Aston Villa career really well. He had a really great spell at Everton at times. And I think over the last year, with Alex Moreno coming in and performing really well, Digne completely lost his place. He had a few appearances last season that weren't particularly great, but he started every game so far this season, and I think he's really refound his form. He's in the top 20% for expected assists against fullbacks across Europe. His crossing volume has been fantastic. He has clearly been told to sometimes just get down the line and get that ball in the box. Doesn't matter if it's cleared out, it's still yardage gained. And he's been doing it whether that's right near the corner flag or also from deep. He has a really good range of passing and is a really dangerous asset for Aston Villa this season. I think Aston Villa's defence maybe has been where it's let them down at times, and we know that that's not Luca Digne's strength. But I don't think he's been particularly exposed at all this season, and I think when Moreno comes back, he's going to have to fight back for that place the way that Digne is playing. The most disappointing player for Aston Villa for me so far this season is Yuri Tielemans. He was signed on a free from Leicester City. There were a lot of clubs sniffing around. I know Arsenal were linked at some point. I know Manchester United were linked at some point. A lot of top teams looking at him for the way that he's played for Leicester City. He's really stood out in that Leicester City team over the last couple seasons. But he hasn't actually started in the league so far this season. He's only played 150 minutes. He is nowhere near replacing Douglas Luiz and Boubacar Kamara, who have been their 2 starting sixes, who have been fantastic. And it's just been a bit disappointing. I think we would have liked to see him play a bit more. But yeah, so far, he's not getting the minutes. He's clearly not performing maybe in training, or he's not what Emery is looking for in a midfielder, and I wouldn't be surprised potentially if he is moved on at the end of this window if he's not getting any game time. Moving on to the 6th place team in the league, Brighton and Hove Albion, having another fantastic season. Very similar to Aston Villa, we've sort of heard maybe that Brighton are going to drop off, they're not going to perform as well with European football, and just still cracking on. They are scoring so many goals, such exciting attacking football, but maybe just at the back, letting in a few too many goals. And if they did have that defence a little more solid, we could see them even higher up the league, and I'm sure that's something that De Zerbi... Actually, no, I'm not sure of that. I don't think De Zerbi is looking to shore up that defence. I think he likes playing this ultra-attacking football. I think he is happy risking scoring more than the opponent. We see them win 4-1, 4-2. He is happy to sacrifice that defence, leave open space, and have just those 2 centre-backs sitting on the halfway line so high. And also sucking in and baiting the press when needed to move it up the pitch. They just play very high risk, but also very high reward football. And they have been rewarded with a 6th place in the league so far this season. And for me, their standout player has, of course, been Kaoru Mitoma. He is such an electric player, such a brilliant dribbler. He is in the top 7% in Europe versus other wingers throughout the last year. He has got 3 goals and 3 assists, and he has been someone that Brighton have really looked to in their attacking unit. Somebody who I think had a really good season last season. I didn't think he was lacking in terms of how clinical he was. He did miss quite a few chances last season, as did other Brighton players. It's been one of their main problems across the last few years, is the way that they convert their chances. We always see them have such a high XG and expected goals really high, but maybe not finishing those chances as well as they should have. But Mitoma, I think, has really brought that into his game and become a lot more ruthless this season. He is getting those numbers up. 6 goal contributions in 8 games, as I said, is a really great return so far. He's also in the top 10% for attacking penalty box touches. So he's not just dribbling out wide and crossing it in. He is really driving into that box, which is really bringing Brighton forward and is really carrying them forward in an attacking sense. Another player who has been fantastic and I think really goes under the radar, not just for Brighton but across the whole league, is Solly March. He's not a silky player. He's not a flair player. He is just an incredibly solid, incredibly hard-working and incredibly versatile player. We saw him play left back this season. We've seen him play on the right of midfield. We've seen him play on the left of midfield. He can do it almost all for Brighton. He's in the top 15% across Europe for non-penalty expected goals and expected assists. His pressing and defensive numbers are also fantastic. He is such a hard worker, and I feel like he never gets brought up as a player who's really good for Brighton. It's normally, we hear Matoma, Ferguson, Dunk, and for me, March is up there with one of the best Brighton players. He had a really good goal and assist return last season. I think he got around 15 goals and assists combined. And just a really brilliant player. And this might come as a surprise, this one. But actually the most disappointing player, not in terms of how he has played, but maybe in the way that he has been used, is Evan Ferguson. At the start of this season, I was really excited to see Ferguson get a lot more minutes. I was expecting him to play almost every game in the league, really be that leading man for Brighton. And I understand De Zerbi is using his team wisely, not putting too many minutes on anyone, but I just really wanted to see Ferguson become the leading man and the main striker for Brighton. His per 90 stats are fantastic. His goals per 90, his shots per 90, his penalty area touches per 90, all really elite level, but he's just not getting the minutes for me at the moment. I know that's nothing to do with Ferguson, but I just think he needs to be played more ahead of or alongside Welbeck or João Pedro. I think for me, he has to be starting more games, and I think it will really help Brighton if he does. Moving on to 7th place, we have West Ham, another team who have performed potentially surprisingly well. Had a really great start to the season, sort of playing against the stronger teams, a really low block, counter-attacking, quick transitioning style of play, and against the lower teams they are actually retaining the ball really well, using their possession in the opposition's half and keeping it. So we've seen really two different styles of play from West Ham, both of which have come off really well so far this season. And for me, their best player, and potentially the reason why they are so high, is James Ward-Prowse. I sung his praises a few weeks ago on the podcast, saying that it sounds like a bit of a cliche that, James Ward-Prowse should have been in the England team over the last couple of years. We always hear it. But for me, he absolutely now has to be in that England team. He has really developed his game since coming into West Ham. He's almost playing more as a 10 as opposed to sort of in a double pivot. He does move around and transition between the two, but he's getting a lot higher up the pitch. He is his pressing numbers are really increasing and doing really, really well. He seems a lot more mobile this season, something potentially that he may have been criticised for before, and his ability from set piece situations fits West Ham to a T. You're looking at Zuma, Aguard and Souček, as well as Antonio. Getting on the end of some of his corners and free kicks is such a dangerous asset for West Ham, especially aside when they are moving that ball quickly up the pitch, trying to gain some yardage, and then getting a free kick in a dangerous position just suits them absolutely perfectly. 2 goals and 3 assists so far this season, and it looks like he's played there for years. Absolutely fantastic, and yeah, as I said, get him on the plane, Gareth. It's about time. The unsung hero from West Ham for me is someone who I did mention, a big corner threat, is Kurt Zouma. He obviously had his controversies a couple of seasons ago, which saw him miss a lot of football. He has been a really good player for West Ham throughout his time there, though. He had a good season with Everton previously before that, and I think in the last sort of 3 or 4 years, he has been a really consistent performer in the Prem, and someone that we don't really hear much about. I think now that West Ham are moving their way up the league, starting to play in Europe, we are starting to hear about how good he is. But for me, he is still really underrated. He has some fantastic defensive stats. He is producing almost 6 clearances per 90. His tackles and interceptions per 90 are also very high. And he is such a dangerous goal threat. We see him sort of pick up 4 or 5 goals throughout the season from corners. And with James Ward-Prowse, I would not be surprised to see him hit 5 or more this season. He already has 1 under his belt, and he is a stonewall in that West Ham defence. The most disappointing player from West Ham for me so far this season, Ben Rama. someone I was really excited to actually see going into this season. I think they had a really good attacking unit of Ben Rama on the left, Bowen on the right. Paqueta, I was anticipating playing just behind Antonio with Ward-Prowse and Souček. But now with James Ward-Prowse pushing up and Alvarez sitting alongside Souček, it's mean Paqueta has pushed out to the left side of midfield where he has been fantastic. And I don't think you can drop Paqueta if you're West Ham. He is a brilliant, brilliant player and someone who has deserved that left midfield spot. But it has meant that Ben Rama has been pushed out of the team a little bit. He unfortunately isn't as good as Lucas Paqueta, and I think he had a really good start to the season. He had a good 1 or 2 games under his belt before we started to see a little drop in form, slowly pushed out the team, and I don't think we're going to see too much of him now so far this season, potentially in the Europa League. If they have an easy fixture, he will probably play there. And he is still a really good player, someone who brings a lot, but yeah, he unfortunately has to be West Ham's most disappointing player so far for me this season. Moving on to 8th position, Newcastle United, the Geordies. They've had a bit of a up and down season, I guess you could say. They've had a few disappointing results. They've had a few amazing results, looking at PSG, Aston Villa, beating Man City in the Cup. And I think another side who will perform really well this season and will be staying in that top 8 for sure. They have a really talented squad and some really good, hard-working players who all seem to play for the unit and play really well together. Their best player, I think, has to be Bruno Guimaraes. Absolutely amazing player. He is still really, really underrated, I think. He gets a lot of mention as being one of Newcastle's best players, but I think we very rarely hear him as being one of the league's best midfielders, and for me, he is in that bracket. He is someone who really got Newcastle into that top 4 last season. He can play a number of positions in midfield. He is normally the deepest 6 with 2 free 8s either side of him. And I think that just shows his quality because he is so good on the ball, but he is so good off the ball as well. And he has really protected Newcastle despite maybe not being seen as much of a destroyer. But he is just superb. He's gotten a goal and assist so far this season, which is very decent for someone who's normally playing as that deepest midfielder. And yeah, it was close between him and Alexander Isak for me. I'm a really big fan of Isak. I think he is going to become one of the best strikers in the league for sure. I'm not sure if he's quite there just yet, but looks really, really good. And as well as Kieran Trippier, who I think has had a fantastic season so far, especially in the last 4 or 5 games. An unsung hero and someone, again, who we have raved about on this podcast and is maybe not getting the plaudits they deserve, especially following a lot of the conjecture about his move from Everton, how much money was spent, how much sort of about his personality, maybe that he's not the best for a dressing room, that people are saying he's a bit of a spoiled brat, is Anthony Gordon. I think on the back of that Euros tournament, the Youth Euros tournament, where he was player of the tournament, he has just been a different man. He has played 90 minutes at the level that we saw in 10-minute spells at Everton, which is such a big jump, and he seems really confident. He seems like the fans were maybe not so sure when they first signed him, but are completely on board now. Someone really confident, someone really aggressive, someone really direct. 2 goals, 2 assists, and for me, he has got to be Newcastle's starting left wing. He has been suspended after picking up 5 yellow cards, but when he comes back, he's got to be that starting left wing because he is a fantastic player. And unfortunately, the most disappointing player this weekend was actually quite a tough one to pick. I think Newcastle have had some really good performing players. I don't think anyone has been particularly disappointing, but unfortunately I had to give this to Nick Pope. Potentially, if I was very harsh, could have given it to Sandro Tonali in terms of maybe the impact that he had on his first game and the transfer and how much of a big move it was, that maybe he hasn't hit the heights despite playing really well. But I have gone for Nick Pope. I think as the Newcastle team starts to progress, playing in the Champions League, being one of the most dangerous teams in the country, I think Nick Pope starts to become less a part of that team. We know he is not an elite ball-playing goalkeeper, and I think now that Newcastle are probably facing a lower volume of shots, it's a lot more difficult for him to show his shot stopping. And I think that's something we discussed last week with Sam Johnston for Crystal Palace. Someone who gets a lot of shot volume and can show off their goalkeeping, whereas Nick Pope can't. And Nick Pope's shot stopping is the best part of his game. He's not your Edison, your Onana, those goalkeepers who are really good with the ball. And I think as Newcastle progress, I don't think he'll be replaced anytime soon. But I think as Newcastle get better and better, he is probably becoming one of their not worst performing goalkeepers, but the player who doesn't maybe fit their system as well. Speaking of Sam Johnston, moving on to 9th place is Crystal Palace. And for me, their best player so far this season has been Sam Johnston. He has had a fantastic season. He's had such a good season that I've put him ahead of Eze and Anderson, both of whom have been brilliant as well. He has a 78.7% save percentage, which is one of the highest in the league. He has 40% of clean sheets so far this season, sitting on 4. He has been superb. He is getting a really, really high save volume. They have 4 clean sheets so far this season. He has been brilliant. And for me, he has really earned that England place as the third choice goalkeeper. Sometimes that can just be given out to, who's the best third choice? Oh, it's probably blah, blah, blah. But he has really, really earned that. The unsung hero so far for me at Crystal Palace is another defender, Tyrick Mitchell. It's a name that we heard probably 3 or 4 years ago, I'd like to say, when he was first coming into the Crystal Palace team. And I think a lot of that was from fantasy football. I think he was like 4 million at the time, and people were saying, he's going to be their starting left back. Get him in, and he's a good sort of player to have. Whereas for me now, he is developing into a really, really solid left back, not just someone who is underrated, somebody who has got a lot of quality about them. His stats are decent. I can't lie and say that they're exceptional. He has some good defensive numbers and some good sort of progressive numbers as well. But he's just started all 8 games. He has been really consistent, really solid, and only 24 years old and an English player. I feel like normally we start to hear a bit of hype around this time if they're playing well, but I haven't really heard much about him, so I just wanted to give him a shout out. So well done, Mitchell. Been playing really well so far this season. The most disappointing player for Palace, this was quite a difficult one to pick because I don't think there was too much expectation for Palace's season going in to this year. But for me, it has to be Jefferson Lerma, somebody signed from Bournemouth. I think he was on a free. He's on a fairly decent contract. I think he's on about 70k a week, so maybe you're expecting him to be sort of one of Palace's best performers on that wage. But he just quite hasn't broken into the team yet, really. We've seen him from Bournemouth that he's a really good progressive carrier of the ball, someone who plays deep, picks up the ball and then moves it forward very quickly. But he just hasn't really been able to get into the team, and he could have been someone that we expected to be a starter for Crystal Palace week in, week out. But we just haven't seen it yet. So, sorry Jefferson, but you are the most disappointing player so far for me from Palace this season. Up next, we have one of the biggest clubs in the country, just in the top half. It is Man United. I think this is one where there'll be a lot of people saying, you could put the whole squad in disappointing, which it was tempting. It was tempting to be able to take advantage of Man United not doing well as an Arsenal fan, but I've given them the benefit of the doubt, and I think I've picked a good group of players out of maybe where they haven't been performing too well. So far for me, the best player has been a difficult one to pick. There's a few players who have performed well. Just bring up the tension with a little gap there. But for me, it's Rasmus Højlund has been what I think is their best player so far this season. I know he hasn't played much, and I know he doesn't even have a goal or an assist yet. But for me, he is somebody, I think he's probably the only player left in that United squad at the moment where he brings a fear to the opposition. Every time I've seen him play, defenders are clearing the ball almost instantly. They are not taking any chances because of how quick and how strong he is. And his hold-up play, I think, has been absolutely exceptional so far this season, especially for someone of his age, someone so young who has come into that team and I think has really made an impact straight away. Other players, potentially, I don't think Bruno Fernandes has had a bad season. I think Diogo Dalot has had a pretty solid season. Casemiro has had a so-so season, but I think because Casemiro's standards are so high, it would be quite difficult to put him in as the best player, despite still performing fairly well. The unsung hero for me, this was a really difficult one to pick, where you have a high expectation of Man United and not many players are sort of beating that at the moment. But for me, there was one that really stood out as somebody that we would never have expected to even not just play for United, but even be in the squad, and that's Johnny Evans. The 35-year-old Northern Irish centre-back has just come out of nowhere. He's only played 3 games, but I think the way he's stepped up and stepped into that team, and I don't think he's performed badly. I think he's been pretty decent. I think he has done a job. He's filled in with their really bad injury problems in their defence. And he's just done a shift for them. And I think he deserves all the credit for it, because I'm sure it was a big meme at the time that Evans was randomly signing for United, but he's done well and he's done a job. And yeah, little pat on the back for Johnny Evans. Disappointing player, could be a number. Rashford, I don't think has had a great season so far. We're looking at Mason Mount, again, not particularly performing very well. But for me, it does have to be Onana. I had a lot of hope with Onana coming into the league. He was absolutely amazing in Serie A and in the Champions League last season. The way he plays is incredible. The way he passes the ball out and starts the attack for Milan was amazing, and I think we have seen glimpses of that at United. He is really good on the ball. He has such a great range of passing, and his accuracy on passes is fantastic. But what has really let him down is his shot stopping so far this season. Quite a big handful of United's goals have been very savable. I think his handling hasn't been great. His strength in his wrists when he's saving looks really weak. The way he's springing for diving saves just does not look right. I'm not sure if this is something that maybe I have missed when he was at Milan. I was too focused on the way he plays with his feet, and I've completely missed what he actually is like as a goalkeeper, which I know we talk a lot about ball-playing goalkeepers, but at the end of the day, shot stopping should be their strongest asset. It's what they're there to do, and he has completely missed that so far this season. And the price tag and the hype that he was coming into United, for me, he just has to be the most disappointing player. Another team that really should be higher in the league, Chelsea, 11th place. All up and down. They've had a few decent results against sort of Luton, Burnley, but just that squad has not gelled well. We've talked a lot about them in previous episodes, so please check them out. I don't want to ramble on about how much they've spent, where they're going wrong, their tactics too much, but yeah, check out the other episodes if you would like to hear us discuss that. But for now, just a few players to pick out from that squad that have actually done well. One of them is Raheem Sterling. He has been their main man this season. He really has. He is at the heart of almost all of their attacks, whether that is finishing chances with 3 goals or creating them, whether that's directly or also from just driving the team forward from deep. He's looked very different this season. We normally have seen him in his Man City days and for England as someone who latches onto balls and finishes, is sort of that last player in the move, whereas now I think he's picking up that ball a lot more, directly driving and really creating things for Chelsea. He's in the top 8% in Europe for wingers with attacking penalty box touches, and he's getting nearly 5 progressive carries per 90, which just shows that he's really picking up that ball and driving Chelsea forward. An unsung hero, this again is quite a difficult pick for a team that we have a lot of hope for and maybe aren't performing well, but I think someone who has gone under the radar is Conor Gallagher. He's started every game so far for Chelsea in the league, and he's been a really all-round player. I think he's been playing alongside Caicedo as the 6 in a few games, with Enzo Fernandez playing as the 10, but I think what he suits best is when it's Caicedo as a 6 and Fernandez and Gallagher both as free 8s. I think they bring slightly different things. I think Fernandez is a really good passer and is probably the more creative of the two, but I think Gallagher is... It's difficult to describe Conor Gallagher. I think he is a really good presser. I think he has really high blocks and tackles in the sort of top 20-25 percentile for pressing as a midfielder, and I really like to see him further up, like we saw when he was on loan at Crystal Palace. I don't think Enzo Fernandez suits that just as well as Conor Gallagher. I think Enzo Fernandez is a little bit better playing deeper, but I think Conor Gallagher really hassling defenders, playing balls around the opposition defence is where it really suits him, and I think in the last couple games now we've seen that with Enzo Fernandez dropping deeper and Poch potentially abandoning the 4-2-3-1. But he's sitting on a 0.3 non-penalty expected goals and expected assists per 90. So some really good stats, and someone we haven't heard too much about. The most disappointing player from Chelsea, for me, it seems like quite an obvious one, and it would have to be Mudryk. I think purely for the price tag, and maybe that this season we were really expecting him to get more minutes, to really step up, but we just haven't seen it so far. He's sitting on less than 70% pass completion, less than 2 take-ons per 90, which I think is something where his best game is taking on and driving up players, and we just haven't seen that. Not getting the minutes, he's not in the starting 11 at all. It's Sterling and Palmer going forward looking now, and Mudryk isn't really getting a sniff. So for me, most disappointing player at Chelsea. Moving on to 12th place, we have the other team in West London, Fulham. They have had an okay season, performing maybe a little bit better than we expected. A lot of people expected them to drop off. And for me, a reason for that is Palhinha, one of the best defensive midfielders in the league. Absolutely superb. I think we saw the difference he has made since he's come back. I think Fulham fans are thanking God that the move to Bayern Munich fell through. It would have been a great addition for Bayern Munich, but a huge loss for Fulham. He is in the top 1% for tackles per 90 across Europe against other DMs, and in all other defensive stats, your blocks, clearances, interceptions, aerial duels, he is in the top 20%, at least. Most of it is that sort of top 10%. He is an elite defensive midfielder, and somebody who, I think he will go to Bayern Munich eventually. He is good enough to play for the best sides in Europe. The unsung hero from Fulham is Bernd Leno, somebody who has been getting more praise recently as a really great shot stopper, and he is just that. He is in the top 4% in Europe for save percentage, and he is in the top 1% for post-shot expected goals minus goals conceded. So the amount of goals they are conceding and the amount of goals they are expecting to concede, they're conceding nowhere near as many goals as they should be conceding because of him, because of how good at shot stopping he is. He has been Fulham's best player alongside Palhinha probably for the last 2 seasons, and he's kept it up this year. Really, really good job. A disappointing player from Fulham is between 2 for me. One is Calvin Bassey. He came in from Ajax. I think a few people were sort of expecting him to step right into the team. He hasn't quite done that. He's a really exciting centre-back in a way. He's very progressive in terms of his carries and his passes, but he has looked a little bit erratic at times, and I think with Fulham they're not quite at that level where they can risk having their centre-backs moving the ball forward as much. So we haven't really seen him play too much this season. The other player is Raul Jimenez. He is it's really sad actually, because he has not looked the same since his injury. Before that injury, he was one of probably the top 10 strikers in the league, and if they would have made this signing before the injury, I'm sure he would have been scoring goals, getting assists, and really being the pivotal player in their attack. But unfortunately, he just hasn't looked the same. He is still good off the ball. I think he's still a really good presser. He's in the top sort of 10% in terms of your tackles and interceptions and things like that for strikers in Europe. But his like attacking statistics, his shots, he obviously hasn't scored. His expected goals are even very low, and his sort of passing and carrying has been really, really poor this season. And I think Fulham will probably be better off letting Jimenez maybe potentially be more of a bench and impact player, and having Vinicius be their starting striker going forward. Slowly working our way down the table now, we are getting into that sort of bottom third, with Forest sitting in 13th place. A good season so far for them. Their squad is looking good. It was obviously massive, but there's some really good players in there. And the best of the bunch for me is Taiwo Awoniyi. A really exciting, a really strong, a really quick. He is like perfect physicality for a striker in the Prem. He is uses that really, really well as well in terms of his pressing and hassling defences, and he's cropped up with 3 goals and 2 assists so far this season, and I think that has been a big thing for Forest, is to have him starting every game and leading the line for them, because he has been brilliant. A couple unsung heroes for Forest for me are 2 fairly new signings. Ibrahim Sangare has been absolutely... Actually, no, I'm going to take that back. I was going to say he's been absolutely brilliant. I don't think he's been absolutely brilliant. I think he has been very good, and I think he has transitioned well into the Nottingham Forest side. He's a name that I think a lot of big clubs have been sniffing around at for a long time. Nobody took that chance to sign him. Reasons for that, I'm not too sure, because he has had fantastic stats in the Dutch league, and these fantastic stats have carried on. He's in the top 20, 15% for almost all defensive stats across Europe, and he's a really, really solid player for Forest and has been really, really good. And I think that signing has gone a little bit under the radar. Another player that they've signed recently as another unsung hero, I mentioned him, I think it was last week or the week before on the podcast, is Murillo. Signed from Corinthians for only 10 million, and he looks brilliant. He is quite a short centre-back, but built. He is very bulky, and his defensive stats, you're looking again, top 15% in Europe, but also adding to his game, he has progressive carries and progressive passes, are really elite as well. Corinthians fans were gassing up Forest fans when they first signed him, saying you've got a real player on your hands here, and I think he has proved it so far this season, especially in the last 2 game weeks. He's put up some quality performances. In 14th place is Wolverhampton Wanderers. A bit of a mixed season so far. Not too bad, not too great at times, but they've had some good performance so far. I think the best of which being Pedro Neto. He is, for me, Wolves' best player so far this season. 1 goal and 5 assists. He has been Wolves' standout attacker. He is in the top 1% for assists, expected assists, non-penalty expected goals, and expected assists across all of Europe for all wingers, which is fantastic, especially coming from someone who's not at one of the bigger clubs. He's also in the top 10% for shot-creating actions across Europe too. He has looked really confident, and he has had a few bad injuries in his time, but he has just pushed that to the side, really carried Wolves forward. The crazy thing is, I think he can even get better. I think he can really step up his pressing and his defensive work, and I think he'll become one of the best wingers in the league one day. And I think if he carries on so far this season, he is going to carry Wolves up that table for sure. The unsung hero at Wolves for me is Matheus Cunha, somebody who has not had the best sort of career over the last 3 or 4 years, I think it's fair to say. He had a really good spell when he was in the German league, and I think once he moved to Atletico, that move didn't quite work out. When he was first at Wolves, maybe not hitting the heights that we were hoping, but this season he has been fantastic. One of the best pressers and one of the best forwards with a really good defensive work rate in the league. His numbers are fantastic, and he has been such a great carrier for them. We saw this, I think it really highlighted in the United game, when he was just running through Casemiro almost all game, running through that midfield, and he's in the top 3% for successful take-ons in Europe, with a goal and an assist to his name. I think that front 3, if they can have them all playing at once, Neto, Cunha, Juan, brilliant. The most disappointing player for Wolves so far, again, somebody who maybe hasn't had an awful season, but somebody who I think has had a big drop-off in form in the last 18 months is Jose Sarr. He was previously considered probably one of the best goalies in the league, one of the best shot stoppers, and his numbers are not great this season. They have really dropped, and just doesn't look like that sort of confident, assured shot-stopping keeper that we saw a while ago. So unfortunately, he is the most disappointing player for Wolves so far this season, for me. Moving into a surprising one here, 15th place is Brentford. Somebody we expected really to be up there so far this season. Somebody that, even though they were missing Ivan Toney, we were all saying, it's not going to matter, they're such a well-drilled unit, and they had a really good start to the season. But since then, they have just completely dropped off, and they are slowly slipping down the league. Their best player, maybe who's propping them up a little bit for me, is Jensen. From midfield, he's cropped up with 3 goals and an assist, and he has at times really picked up the ball and been that leader for Brentford when I think they've needed it at times. They have not been performing as well as we would have hoped, and he has been a bit of a standout player in there for me. An unsung hero, I think, not just for this season, but for last season as well, and I think it's been a really underrated signing. He's come from the Italian league. It is the Scottish fullback Aaron Hickey. He can play both sides, left or right back if needed. He's really two-footed. He is, I wouldn't say he's an elite attacking fullback or an elite defensive fullback, but I think he has really good attributes in both. I think he looks really solid, he looks really confident, and he can get forward when needed. Normally, I think their system is sort of Rico Henry is bombing down that left side, with Aaron Hickey maybe being the more conservative of the 2 fullbacks. But he has the quality to go forward and create some really good chances if needed to. The most disappointing player from Brentford for me, there's probably a couple we could have picked from, but I think for me it has to be Wissa. He had a really good start in the first 2 games. He is on 2 goals and 1 assist, and I think for me it's that drop from those first few games to now. I think the last 4 or 5 games he has looked really sluggish, looked really poor. His pressing has completely dropped. I think there's been a loss of the attacking wavelength. I think maybe Sharda dropping and not playing as well. I can't remember if he was injured or not, if he has just been dropped to the bench, but he hasn't played in the last few games. And Mbuemo as well, that attacking unit has just really lost it, and I think Wissa's drop in form has been a big part of that. Moving on to 16th place, and a team that I have gassed up all season, Everton. A really good performing team who are just not getting the results for me. They have a few really good players, and the best of which for me is Doucouré. He has been around the league for so many years now as a fairly sort of consistent player, never getting too many plaudits, never getting too many haters, just a normal player playing okay. But I think this season he has stepped up. He has been playing just off the striker, mainly at times. But he's all over the pitch. He is playing. He's picking up the ball in the defensive third when needed. He is progressing it forward. Really good carrier, really good passer. And he is hounding defences as well as a presser alongside the striker. He is in the top 4% in Europe for midfielders for attacking penalty box touches, and he's in the top 20% for successful take-ons, showing how he is picking up that ball and driving it into the penalty box. He is the one who is really bringing it forward for Everton and is helping them create a lot of chances. It's just now up to those forwards to actually start finishing them. An unsung hero for Everton, quite a few. I think they're not getting the plaudits they deserve so far, Everton, and I know it's because they're not picking up points, which makes complete sense, and it sounds like I'm absolutely talking rubbish, but for me, the unsung hero is James Garner. I think at just 22 years old, to be as versatile as he has been in the side is a really, really good attribute to have. He has been playing centre mid, right mid, left mid, moved all over the shop, and I don't think his performance has dropped when he has been moved around at all. He has... I think he has a 1 goal, 1 assist to his name so far this season, potentially more assists, but he's just been a really solid player and somebody who has maybe gone under the radar as a good performing player so far in the league this season. The most disappointing player for Everton for me has to be Dan Juma. I think there's been a lot of conjecture about how good he is and how good he was at Villarreal. Obviously, when he went to Tottenham, that move maybe wasn't so great. But now he's on loan at Everton. I think we saw, now he's going to get the chance to play. He can really stand out on the Everton team. And we haven't seen it again. He's only played about 360 minutes in the league this season. But he's just unable to consistently get in that team. Whether that's because other players are playing better or he's just not the sort of player that Sean Dyche is really looking for, I'm not too sure. But I think the way he sort of came into the club and a lot of talk about him, he just hasn't hit that for me. Moving into the dangerous positions, well, the first safe position in 17th place, just above the relegation zone at the moment, is Luton Town in 17th place. They have had a difficult start to life in the Prem, but they fought really, really well. Their squad quality is significantly worse and significantly less spent than every other team in the league. So after 8 games to be out of the relegation zone, I think is a fantastic achievement for Luton. Their best player so far for me this season has been Carlton Morris. He is their most talented, their sort of their main man, not just in terms of he's scored 3 goals and has an assist. I think that in itself is fantastic, but I think he is such a leader in that team and he's doing a lot more than just scoring goals. He has been a really good presser. He is in the top 5% for shot-creating actions across strikers in Europe and in the top 10% for progressive passes for strikers across Europe. He is dropping in and helping out that midfield to create chances when needed, and then also pushing himself further to get on the end of those as well once he's created those moves. Really good performances so far this season, and he will be a main reason if Luton are able to stay up. An unsung hero, someone we have mentioned a couple of times on this podcast, but nobody's listening. Nobody is agreeing with us, is Doty, the left wing back. Absolutely brilliant. He is, he's almost more like a left mid, I'd say, like an old school left mid. If it was back in day and it was 4-4-2, he would be sitting on that left mid role because his crossing is absolutely fantastic. It is so good. He is in the top 3% for expected assists for fullbacks across Europe, top 3% for attacking penalty box touches, and top 1% for blocks. He has really gone under the radar as someone who has been a main reason why Luton are able to pick up a few points this season, and he is going to be one of their most creative outlets this season, for sure. The most disappointed player for me, I think maybe because I heard of a bit of hype about him, coming from Man City on loan, and also being a £4 million FPL player for your fantasy players out there, is Kabore. He's looked good going forward. A lot of hype about him, obviously, coming from Man City, but he has looked a little bit suspect defensively, maybe not stood out in terms of quality in that Luton side, or maybe just not as much as we were expecting. So for me, unfortunately, he has to be the most disappointing player. But for Luton, there's not many disappointing players. I don't think we had a lot of expectation with them, and I think they're doing probably better than we would have thought. So fair play to Luton. The first team in the danger zone, 18th place, is Burnley. Not being a good start. Not being a good start to life back in the Prem for Burnley. They have really struggled defensively. They have looked very open at times. But a standout player going forward, where they have been okay, and they have been able to get a few goals this season, is Foster. He has 3 goals and 2 assists in 6 games, which is a really good return for the South African. And he's also been a really good presser. Somebody who is leading that line in terms of press, which company is obviously trying to implement. He's trying to win that ball high, play that high risk, high reward football, just not so much reward so far this season. But Foster's been great, and he's taken his chances when needed. And yeah, good player, solid performance so far. An unsung hero, potentially someone who I think we've only sort of heard a little bit about more recently, obviously he's been playing a lot more, is Koleosho. He's looked really bright, and at only 19 years old, he has looked really confident and somebody who is not afraid to pick up that ball and drive at players. He's in the top 1% for successful take-ons for wingers per 19 Europe, so that's a really, really good stat for somebody of his age, and playing in a Burnley team where they haven't been great so far this season, he's really stood out. The most disappointing player from Burnley so far for me is Amdouni. I think there was a lot of hype about how he was going to be the Burnley's main man. He has been outshadowed by Foster for me. He has been working really hard in Company's unit, trying to win that ball back and press high, but it just hasn't worked out. He has not been clinical at all. He's missed a lot of chances. I don't think he's linking up the play very well. I think he's got a lot to work on, and I think he needs to really adapt to the Premier League a lot better and a lot quicker. Otherwise, I think his position could be in trouble in that team. The second player in the relegation zone at the moment, second team in the relegation zone at the moment is Bournemouth, sitting in 19th place. Iraola has come in and, again, like Company, tried to play progressive attacking football, and it just has not worked out so far. The best player for me for Bournemouth so far is Patrick Billing. Philip Billing. Patrick or Philip? Philip Billing. Let's go for Philip. Yeah, Philip Billing. That sounds right. I'm not sure, but whatever his name is, he is Bournemouth's best player for me by quite a way. I think the last 2 or 3 seasons, he's really gone under the radar. I don't think many people really talk about him, and I'm surprised he hasn't had a move potentially to a club with like a more mid-table club, which I know Bournemouth are obviously trying to press to be under their new ownership, but I'm very surprised he hasn't moved on into a bigger club, no offence to Bournemouth, because he is absolutely fantastic. For me, he can play anywhere from almost a centre-forward all the way down to a lone 6. He's very confident defensively, he's a really good carrier, and he always looks so composed on the ball, and he normally ends up being Bournemouth's top scorer for most seasons. So for me, again, it's got to be him as their best player so far this season. An unsung hero for me, potentially, is Kerkez, the left-back, who they signed from the Dutch league. I don't think anyone in Bournemouth's defence has been particularly amazing, but I think the way he's come into the side, he's started all 8 games so far this season, and his defensive numbers are really, really solid. I don't think he's had the opportunity potentially to sort of progress up the pitch much, but I think he's looked like a really solid player, and potentially an underrated signing so far this season. I think any sort of club who would have signed him, he would have fit in really well, and he has done. The most disappointing part of Bournemouth so far for me this season is Utara and Traore. Both have been sitting on the bench all season, not seeing any minutes. Around 220 minutes combined for both of them. Two players who have fantastic per 90 stats, look really dangerous and really aggressive, but I just don't think they're fitting into Iraola's sort of passing style of play. I don't think he wants those sort of risky, tricky wingers just yet, but I think that's where they're missing out. I think they are missing that final third. With Bournemouth, they're keeping the ball really well. They move it up the pitch, but then when they get into that final third, I think they lack that killer instinct, and I think these two players are someone who can bring it. They're not my most disappointing players because of anything they've done. They are my most disappointing players because I want to watch more of them, and I want to see the way they can impact Bournemouth. Finally, Sheffield United, sitting bottom of the league, the only team yet with a win. No, Bournemouth haven't won either. They've had 3 draws, haven't they, Bournemouth? Let me just fact check this now. I should probably look up Billing's first name whilst I'm doing this as well. But yeah, Sheffield United are sitting only on 1 point, unfortunately. It's been really, really poor so far from them this season. But again, like Luton, I don't want to sort of hate on them too much because I don't think there was too much expectation going into the season with Sheffield United. So I think we have to give them credit for a few of their performances so far this season. They, again, like Luton, they don't have the same squad quality and squad spend compared to a lot of teams in the league. And things may start to get better from them as they sort of adapt to being back in the Premier League after many years away. And yeah, Bournemouth sitting currently winless. Sheffield United currently winless on 1 point. For me, the best player is so far this season is Ahmed Hodzic. He's looked very assured, I think. He looks very confident for somebody who's only 24. And he has just been a pretty solid defender for them. I think Sheffield United at the back have been decent. We saw against Man City, I think was the highlight of their season, even though they did go on to lose that game. They looked really, really good, and they were able to crowd around Haaland. I think Ahmed Hodzic was a big key part of that. An unsung hero for Sheffield United is Sousa, playing that defensive midfield role. He has some really good defensive stats. He's obviously not going to be able to be as progressive and attacking as a lot of midfielders in the league, but sitting in front of that defence, he's in the top 1% for tackles across Europe, top 4% for aerials, and top 8% for clearances. So some really good, impressive defensive numbers, and hopefully Sheffield United can keep defending as well as they are, and then eventually that attacking output will come too. And finally, the most disappointing player for Sheffield United so far for me this season. I don't think I had much expectation with Sheffield United, so I think giving anyone a disappointing accolade would be a bit harsh. So I've actually gone for James McAtee because I think he is a fantastic player, someone with so much potential, and for me, I was just disappointed that Sheffield United didn't sign him at the start of the transfer window. They should have really ensured that they got him permanently as early as they could, and I think he's going to be a really key part of that Sheffield United side. So that's it. That is my best performing, unsung hero, and most disappointing player from every club in the Premier League so far this season. Next week, I'm sure my co-host Mev will be back joining us as we review the Premier League action. Back to club football next week, and I can't wait. So thank you everyone for joining the Football Fellowship and for listening to today's episode, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.